Hi, I'm Malin Johansson from the CBHS Olympian here with Mr. Bussell, the chairman of the Alameda County Republican Party. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Oh, you're welcome. It's good to meet you.
So we just have a few questions for you. So the first one is, what are you looking forward to doing as the pandemic situation improves?
Well, one of the things that my wife and I have missed is being able to go out to dinner and just kind of enjoy the town. I live in Livermore, and there's some very nice restaurants, very nice places to visit. Um, I miss being able to go out to the movies and sit down with a group of people. So I'm really looking forward to being together in groups of people again.
Yeah, that sounds nice. What are the next steps we should take with COVID? What do you think?
Well, obviously, we need to take a look at how well the vaccination program is rolling out, how well people are protected from that, and how um, any kinds of variations or new strains of that particular virus, what kind of effect they have. But basically, I think the thing to do is encourage people to get vaccinated and start living a more open life the way we did 2 years ago.
And that brings us to the next question, which is how do you think the government can encourage people to take the COVID vaccine?
Well, the government is a really big, vague question. So there's the CDC, there's our political leaders, there are the local county authorities, there's the state authorities. One of the things that they can just do is they've been telling people that the vaccine's available and the vaccine's effective. They can give good information about what the risks are. Um, Recently, I guess they stopped the Johnson and Johnson vaccine from being used. They paused that because of a very, very small amount of people that actually had some issues with blood clots. So there's questions about how do you balance off various kinds of hazards? Is it more hazardous to get COVID? Is it more hazardous to take the vaccination and possibly get blood clots? I don't think we're very good at talking about those kind of risks. Um, Probably it's much more dangerous to drive your car down to Safeway there in Castro Valley than it is to take a vaccine if you're worried about the effects and the blood clots that might happen. So I think they stumbled that. I think elected officials getting their vaccination, I think that's a good example to people to say, hey, I'm getting it. Don't worry about it. Also, I think elected officials following the rules that they've laid down, I think is a very important thing to do. Many of us remember when the governor of the state had said, wear masks, don't gather together indoors with people. And then we found him up at a very fancy restaurant up in Yountville, a French Laundry, with people. He didn't have a mask on. So when we see that kind of hypocrisy, do what I say, don't do what I do, that actually undermines our elected officials' credibility. So I think that's something that's really important for them to do. I mean, I know you don't like to be told to do something and then you see your teachers, going off in a totally different direction with that.
Yeah, definitely. And then moving on to the next sort of topic is what has President Biden done in office that you think is significant so far?
Well, there were a number of things that he did that have been significant. He canceled the XL pipeline. He wanted to get back into the Paris Accord, that international accord. And he also stopped the program that we had where people that wanted to come into this country, instead of coming in and being let in and then adjudicating their issue later on for refugee status, we said, no, stay in Mexico or stay in your country, and then we'll adjudicate, and then we'll allow you in if really there is a case for that. So from my perspective, a lot of the significant things he's done has actually been kind of negative. He, in ending the XL pipeline, there were people that had very good paying jobs that would be building that. There would be people that would be able to refine that oil into various kinds of products that we'd use. And so that kind of economic activity isn't going to help. It's not going to happen, and people aren't going to be employed in the way they would have been otherwise. Now, you might argue that, boy, we don't want to do fossil fuels, and there's real problems with the environment because of that. But stopping the XL pipeline doesn't mean that Canada isn't going to extract those resources. What it means is Canada is going to ship that someplace else. They'll either ship some of it on ships to China, and so China will be using those fossil fuels there, or some of that stuff is actually would be transported in tanker trucks rather than in rail. And rail is much safer than tanker trucks, far fewer accidents and far fewer environmental impact to properly maintain pipelines. With changing how we dealt with immigration issues, I think it's been pretty obvious that there's been a much larger increase in people trying to cross the border without having the proper credentials for that. And that also makes a large population of people that can be taken advantage of, can be exploited, and can be exploited by criminals who do various kinds of things across the border. So I think he's done some significant things I haven't really supported. So since I am the leader of the Alameda County Republican Party, I'm most noting the kinds of things that I've been disappointed in him doing.
Yeah, and so what would you like to see President Biden do next?
So I think I would like to see not a lot of change in the kinds of economic things that we had put in place in the last administration. I don't know if you recall, but a little over a year ago, the economy was really booming. Unemployment was very low, both for majority populations and for most, in fact, all minority populations. Unemployment was lower than it's ever been since we started recording that. So everyone was having a better chance at a better life. Also, because of that pressure, wages were rising and people's real wages were actually rising for the first time in quite a while. Now, the kinds of things that are done, people always talk about, we don't like this particular tax policy or that particular tax policy. For instance, we lowered the corporate income tax to one that's kind of average of countries around the world. By raising corporate income tax, people feel really good about it and they think, oh, well, the corporations, they'll pay for that and it won't hurt us. But it hurts everyone else, everyone who's working. It raises the cost of goods and makes it more difficult for them. And it gives companies an incentive to move their manufacturing and their production to other countries. For example, I know Apple Computer for many years had a huge pile of money that they had in Europe that they didn't bring back to the United States because of the corporate income tax. So instead of bringing the money back here to invest, it was left over in Europe. Again, making it more difficult for people to find good jobs and for the economy to improve. So one thing I'd like him to do is kind of back off a little hands off on trying to make these changes that perhaps his progressive folks really want him to make. So those are some of the things I'd like to see.
Okay, and then moving on, we're going to talk about, so what do you think about the Derek Shovin verdict?
Well, I think it demonstrated that we can have impartial and fair and following the process. We have a good judicial system that can look at things that people have done and appropriately punish them for those kind of crimes. I didn't know exactly all the details in terms of how those particular verdicts were arrived at, whether it was first degree or second degree or third degree murder or manslaughter or that. But apparently the jury felt that all those charges were proved in the court. And so they found him guilty of all those things. I think there were some missteps, though, by elected officials. I think some of the elected officials that said, oh, there must be this particular verdict or we'll have a riot. I think that really takes away from having due process for people. You're not necessarily in charge of all the facts. You don't have all the facts. And by expressing opinions like that, because you're a respected elected official, I think it makes the jury feel pressured to come up with a particular verdict or not. And even if the jury never did have any pressure to change their verdict, what it does is it opens the door for the person who was convicted to appeal some of his convictions because of the undue influence of elected officials. So I think people should stay at this point, at least in their own lane. Judges should do the judging, they should run the trials. Prosecutors and defenders should try to come to some agreement there. Whereas the elected officials afterwards, they can talk about what needs to happen, what the next steps might be, but rather than front loading ahead of time what they expect the outcome to be and encouraging people to be violent if they don't get the result that they're looking for.
I think you might have already addressed this, but what do you think should happen next concerning civil rights?
Well, I think that what I've seen over the last 10 years is I think that our discussion about civil rights has been a little bit overheated and lacking perhaps facts in some of the discussions that are going on. For instance, there's that poor young woman who was shot by a police officer right at that time. Now, it turns out she had a knife and was about to attack someone with the knife. And fortunately, nowadays, we have a lot of body cams, a lot of video, so we can at least see what happened. I don't know all the details, but apparently it looked like the police officer acted appropriately to save the life of the other young woman who was at risk from the woman who was wielding the knife. But as soon as that happened, all of a sudden, the people that benefit from inflaming and bringing out the worst things started saying that, oh, here's another case of racially motivated episode. We need to do something about that for civil rights. Even without having the facts, they kind of jumped on that and made that happen. So I think we need to be a little more adult some ways. We need to be a little more deliberative, willing to listen to both sides, listen to what people on one side perceive, what people on the other side perceive, and move from there so that we have an environment where people are much more understanding and much more open to folks of other races. It's really a tragedy in this country if a Black man feels like when an officer orders me out of a car, I can't get out because I'm worried that I'm going to be attacked. I'm not sure that that's what happens most of the time. In fact, most of the time, I'm sure those interactions are relatively benign. In the case that it's just they're just trying to find information. But if you're feared of it, if you're afraid, then you might react in a way that heightens the tension of the interactions. And so I wish that we had less of that. I wish that we could feel a little more. And I've heard from both sides on this issue. So, I'd like to have a little more dialogue that's a little more honest about some of these things.
And what do you think about Newsom's recall?
Well, look, I'm really, I was going to say I'm really disappointed in Newsom's actions as governor, and I guess that's true, except he's kind of acted the way I expected him to, and I think he's really failed as a governor. I'm less excited about all the effort and energy that has to go into a recall. Other people have to now run for that before there's going to be an election fairly soon for his governorship. I think he's really demonstrated that he's inept at this, and I don't think he would be able to be reelected at any rate because of the kinds of things he's done. However, I would vote against, or I would vote to recall him, and I would search for someone else to maybe take his place. I know it was, I don't know if you remember, but I do remember when Gray Davis was recalled, and he certainly deserved it. But I was a little disappointed in the person who replaced him, even though he was Republican, because he was someone that had name recognition, but he hadn't really worked in politics for a long time. And I think there's a bit of experience that you need to have dealing with a large organization like California. California is bigger than many countries are. In fact, many of the counties in California have a larger gross product and are larger than many actual countries around the world. So you know, it might seem easy to do when you're sitting on the sidelines and pointing at that, but I'm not sure that's the best way for us to politically get involved. However, I support the people in my party that want to do that, and you know, I've certainly signed the petition. I was certainly against our legislature trying to get everybody's names who'd signed the petition to be exposed to the people that wanted to go against that. So there's been a lot of political infighting for that thing. I just wish we'd pay more attention to rebuilding our infrastructure, making sure that that we have proper housing, that we have enough water, and we have enough energy in the state, rather than, you know, these you know, elbowing that happens in politics.
Okay, and then how do you think the Newsom recall will turn out?
I have no, I was going to say something, but I have no idea how that's going to turn out. I think it'll be a hard fought battle, but I certainly didn't predict the last Republican nominee for president winning the election. I didn't predict that Donald Trump would have been the nominee before that happened. And up until the election time, I really didn't quite think he was going to make it, but he did get elected. And I didn't know how he was going to be, and he did some great things for this country. I know that a lot of people found him to be abrasive, and you didn't like his personality and you didn't like his tweeting. But I think many of the policies that he did benefited all Americans. And I would be very happy to defend any of those policies to anyone. I think that what's happened with the current administration is any policy that had Donald Trump's fingers on it, they try to roll it back as quickly as they could because they just didn't like that. And it was easy to do because he became so unpopular that way. But I think if people give it a fair hearing and really deliberate about what it's accomplished, that would be, I think they would agree with me on that.
Okay, and then lastly, I was just wondering, what's your favorite thing about Castro Valley?
Oh, Castro Valley High, of course. I don't know if your teacher told you, but I've actually taught high school in a few places here and there. And I did substitute teach at Castro Valley High. So I've been up there and known some people. And I actually lived close to there. I used to live near Val's Hamburger. So we would come into Castro Valley quite a bit. Rudy's Donuts is fantastic. 30 years ago, I used to bring my infant son there on the weekend and have a donut and drink coffee and talk to the women there. It was a great place. Rudy was a great guy, and I've known his daughters for many years. So yeah, that's one of the things I love about Castro Valley.
Great. So thank you again for talking to us. We really appreciate it. This is Malin Johansson from the Olympian.